The Osmano Protocol, written and narrated by Alan Walton. Commander Sergei Lazarov arrived at the silo just after lunch, attaché case in hand. Security seemed a little lax today, as the guard simply waved him through and smiled. Very unusual, he thought. It would be reported. The entrance to the main building was a different matter entirely, a code enabler. He tapped in his security card to start the process. 2 CCTV cameras observed his every action as he leaned forward for the retinal scan. The reinforced glass doors opened with a gentle swish, and he was inside. Much warmer in here. He made his way through the turnstile to the heavily guarded arrival desk, where he officially signed in for duty. The thought of being down there at level -33 was rather depressing him. A whole week with that irritating clown Vladimir Pushkin. Besides all that, he would miss his family and friends, but that was what he'd signed up for, and he would simply have to get through it again. The pay was good. Silo Complex 18, 160 miles north of Vladivostok, was the largest ICBM complex in the Russian nuclear arsenal. A deep underground labyrinth of high-yield thermonuclear missiles. It was deemed to have the fastest launch time in the whole Russian system. In the event of a nuclear attack, the High Command were confident all of the missiles could be launched in time, and there were enough of them to wipe out most of the United States and the majority of Europe permanently. The thought of the missiles ever being launched always made him shudder. All his family, all his friends, the world in ruins. He quickly discarded these thoughts as he entered the lift, accompanied by an armed guard. Level -33 was certainly a long way down, as the lift rattled aside the shaft. He did not speak with the guard, as it was forbidden during the descent. The reasons were obvious. He entered the reinforced control room and turned the locking wheel of the 20-ton steel door to securely seal the room. And the air conditioning came on, automatically. Vladimir was laying on the bunk bed, reading a book. They exchanged very basic pleasantries, the Russian way, and Sergei sat in his seat and checked all calibrations. Satisfied all missiles were in a state of readiness, and all launch programs were A-OK, he made himself as comfortable as he could and leaned back in his high back seat. The rumour was that the algorithm that was now being used by Moscow was named Osmano 1. Extremely powerful, but Sergei would never know more, as he simply did not have the required security clearance. Because of the distance between continents and the location of Silo Complex 18, Osmano 1 was almost the near certain guarantee that the US would hopefully not engage in a first strike. Assuming the Politburo could not issue a launch code if wiped out by a first strike, then the Osmano 1 program, on its own authority, would issue the launch codes, and then onwards to Silo Complex 18, and then Sergei and Vladimir would have to turn their keys simultaneously to prime the missiles, and then both flick off the button shields and push at the same time. Once pushed and confirmed, the launch sequence could not be aborted. The Rubicon would be crossed. Back in Moscow, Only the most senior figures knew of the transference of launch authority to the advanced A1 Osmano. For several weeks now there had been many quite assertive NATO exercises close to the borders of the motherland, and a satellite had observed a build-up of short-range nuclear weapons, so the already hair-trigger tension was almost at breaking point. This was in direct response to the brief tank fire exchange on the Czech border and a dangerous standoff on the Polish border by the Russian army. Osmano had been financed by the Monas conglomerate JSC Muscovy. This was the real financial power behind the Russian economy. The military had approved it, eventually. Osmano, in an indirect way, was another level of power for Monas JSC. Financial experts the world over could not fathom how the Monas conglomerate had become so powerful in fact that even their affiliates in many countries were going stronger by the day, and all of that against market trends. Providing no unforeseen events interfered, they could, in theory, take over the world. Very many leading experts were warning governments, but so far their advice was not being heeded, and that at the highest level. The Monas higher echelon knew that the A1 Osmano could do much more than defend the motherland. This was the worst scenario. Their ultimate goal would be to control the world. They had come a long way since creating their world network back in 1777. You know, 1777 is not an insignificant year, as that was the time of the flying machines that made their first appearance over the spired city of Moscow. Some records remain of that time. The hooded figures roaming the cobbled streets in search of suitable initiates. Nobody really knew why they had arrived. It was in fact the first excursion to the third planet from the sun, and yet another world to envelop and mould to their will. Essentially, they were the precursor race before the Ruvians, referred to subsequently as the Samans. The terrible events that triggered the Second World War. A certain Herr Adolf Hitler had been infected by an unknown biological life form, and when appointing his higher command, ensured that they too would be initiated in a biological way. As far as is known, all his close contacts had unusual implants in their neck. As time went on, and when the SS was formed, all of the higher ranks of the military, down to the rank of Oberleutnant, the rest would simply follow like sheep, almost hypnotized by the compelling aura given off by the entity within the host. In an undisclosed location, several hooded figures were huddled over their viewing dome, watching all the world financial transactions and emerging threats to their cloaked empire. They were not in the least concerned about a war on this planet. They had ensured that A1 Osmano would handle the situation in the best way possible and in the shortest time. Nobody in Osmano would be damaged in any nuclear exchange. They had foreseen and partly planned this time, and had ensured that the majority of their world Grand Masters would be perfectly protected along with their families. They did not care about the other animals on this planet, Homo sapien particularly. Back at Silo Complex 18, green lights were lit on the control panel. It was reassuring to Sergei, as all was well, But he'd heard a rumour that any final launch instruction was being handled by an advanced AI. His beetroot soup did not taste as well as it should. The dip bread was not up to much either. The thought that the fate of the whole world was being left to artificial intelligence made him uneasy. After all, anything can fail. He cast the thought aside as he made the hourly checks on the missile status. There were 500 of them, enough to destroy most of the Western world, many times over, and there were another 40 such silos situated across the enormous expanse of the motherland, and all of this probably under the indirect control of the Osmano. Vladimir took over his observational shift at midnight, and Sergei sank down on his bunk and drifted off into a rather fitful sleep. On the Polish border, Western AI-controlled tanks and ready-to-launch drones were now in position. Deep, very deep underground, the gigantic structure of the Osmano supercomputer was analysing all of the border activities. The architects had endowed it with many other qualities than analysis, decision-making, and the like. It had some of the essence of its creators. Osmano knew that these massing border forces were a military exercise, so named, but it would not make any assumptions. But it was still considered a serious threat. Morning came like it should, and they changed shifts. Vladimir rolled over on his side, and to Sergei's horror, a fat green lava was wriggling across Vladimir's shoulder and up onto the back of his neck. Vladimir grunted as the lava disappeared inside. A small glob of crimson blood dripped onto the pillow. He could see movement under the skin on the neck, and then it had disappeared. Sergei could not leave his seat under any circumstances while there was an unattended second seat. The world was hanging by a thread, although he did not know it. He would tell Vladimir when he woke up. He'd never seen anything like this. Those in business suits, doctors' coats, and police uniforms stopped what they were doing while receiving the message. Osmano was in direct contact with the Brotherhood and warning them of his defense decision. They immediately dropped what they were doing and hastily went to their respective places of safety. As fighter jets converged from the west and close to Russian airspace, Osmano decided the time had come. If you'd been in its chamber, you might well have heard some unsettling laughter emanating and echoing around the chamber. Osmano was at last getting its moment of glory and fame for the history books that would never be read, apart from the higher ranks of the Monas Empire. Sergei was startled when the klaxon sounded and all the control lights turned red. His heart was in his mouth as he shouted out to Vladimir. It took a few seconds to wake him. Vladimir staggered to his seat, rubbed his eyes, and stared blankly at the control station. This was it. Without hesitation, they entered the launch codes provided by Osmano and instantly were accepted. Vladimir turned to face him, eyes lit up wild and grinning in an insanely happy way, hand on the launch key. For a second, Sergei hesitated, looking at the pistol pointing at him. Then all his training kicked in, and they counted down. 3, 2, 1, launch. both keys turned at 0 and the button shields were flicked off. Both were pushed at exactly the same moment. Vladimir was laughing. His eyes were turning red. Sergei was tearful and started to pray out loud. There was a single pistol shot, and Sergei slumped back into his seat. The control display in front of him dripping with blood. Vladimir started to sing an old Russian folk song as the lava in his neck started to emerge, but not before the pistol entered his mouth and the second shot passed through his brain. There was a loud rumbling sound all around the silo as simultaneous rocket engines were ignited and the hatches above ground slid open and smoke billowed out. The Osmano birds were away. In no time at all, really, many clusters of ICBMs were raining down on major cities in Europe, while their remaining companions soared onwards to the United States and Canada. The crew on the International Space Station observed the multiple launches and saw that there was not yet a response from the western side. All residents of the ISS space station looked on in total horror, as there were many intense flashes of light below, as city after western city was obliterated. As they looked down, most of the crew were crying. There was no way home. Never, nothing to go back to. All the people they knew would not exist anymore in just a few minutes. Oh God. Deep underground, Osmano 1 was satisfied it had performed perfectly and felt a rush of emotional satisfaction. Its task now was to plan the future for the remaining members of the Order, the higher ones that resided in nutrient-filled tanks in places of safety. As Europe was dying in the inferno, multiple Minuteman ICBMs in the USA were lifting off to their pre-designated destinations. Sergei's wife, Ludmila, had her 2 children on her lap while trying to finish knitting Sergei's jumper. She smiled to herself. It will be finished before he gets back. And she would cook him his favourite meal, plimeni, and of course get him his favourite vodka. What a lucky boy he was. The ICBMs were closing fast, less than 400 miles away. In just a few seconds they would be here. Ludmila got up to make some tea. It was all over before she made it to the kitchen door. In the well-protected chamber, Osmano 1 was gleeful and felt a real sense of satisfaction of how well it had performed. In the tank next to it, a smile appeared on the contorted face of the Queen Lava. The world was ending, but most of the others would survive post the ape race. The end.